Bruce led into this introduction very nicely. The power of prayer, the power of the Spirit. We're going to hear about the Spirit today from our speaker. Kathleen Damiani is a seeker, as are many of us, and she has had a near-death experience like some of us. And it doesn't make us any better or any worse or any different, well, different maybe, but no better, to have had a near-death experience. As Bruce was saying, and as we were praying to open those doors, it seems when you have a near-death experience, those doors come open a little bit easier. And to be open to the Spirit seems to become a little bit easier. And the experiences of searching for the Spirit and finding the Spirit and finding a oneness and finding a love and finding people to walk the path with you, all this seems to be perhaps a little easier, and maybe a little bit, but it's what every one of us, each and every one of us in this room has this ability. You have this ability to be open to the Spirit, be open to the oneness. Kathleen has studied a lot along her path. She's gotten her master's and her doctorate. I could throw out big words like epistemology. We're searching for knowledge. And along here, she's traveled. She's sophisticated. And yet she's very open. She's been here in this fellowship a number of times. She hangs around the area a bit. She's one of us. Kathleen Damiani.
Thank you. I don't know if you could just give me a few minutes, because I had some things to hand out. I always start these things with pictures. Many of you know Wendy Oak. She comes here, she lives in Canada, and she has, she's given talks here about the Alma drawings. I don't know with this.
Mike, because they are recording it.
I have a really loud voice. So I always start with showing pictures of the realm that I talk about. So the realm that I talk about, I entitle the Anima Mundi, the soul of the world. And that's the territory that I think that with the institutionalization by Constantine of Christianity, that we were closed off to. And I don't think it was intentional. There were a number of factors that led to that. But the Alma drawings that Wendy Oak has shown here on a number of occasions and at the ARE, this is a picture of Sophia. And Sophia is the personification of wisdom, and it's a Greek word that means wisdom. And it's a huge, huge area. Basically, wisdom was honored and in the ancient Near East, and it forms the basis of our word for philosophy, Philine, Sophia, love of Sophia. Philine actually means brotherly love. It's not erotic love. But I'm going to pass this around. I don't know if there's an easy way to do it, but the reason which you should, what I find very, very interesting in the Alma drawings is that everything is related to everything. Indigenous cultures believe if there's a space left in any drawings, that's where the dark forces can come in. So Alma's drawings are connected. Everything is connected with everything else. And so I find that really interesting. And I've got another set of drawings. And I do have handouts, but probably not enough for I think what I'm going to do is so I have handouts, but maybe we'll do these later. There are terms and definitions that I use, and also there's material on Sophia. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to leave material, and I also have business cards with my website on them, and I have information on Sophia. If you don't have a website, You can take the printed copy because there's not enough for people. There's not enough to go around. So my background, the quote came from Kathleen Damiani, and he is my husband's father, and he wrote Astronoesis among many other books, which means knowledge of the stars. So he did astrology at Wisdom's Goldenrod, which he founded in upstate New York, and his teacher was Paul Brunton, who brought Eastern mysticism to the West. And so these are from the publisher, Larson's. So Paul Brunton came to Wisdom's Goldenrod, as did the Dalai Lama, in 1979, and spoke of my father-in-law as being his closest spiritual brother and a great Lama. So the story unfolds from this drama. Now, was anybody here last week at VB Ions at the talk? Okay, just a few of you. Okay, so I think I only have 30 minutes, right? Okay, so if somebody could remind me at 20 after, and I'll cut this short. But I want to read a shortened version of the near death, which actually was a full death. It was the full death of my husband. And out of the death of my husband, I was introduced into a world of synchronicities, dreams, images that showed me another world. It was a world that my husband was experiencing during the year between the time that his father died in October 2nd, 1984, when we were visiting the Dalai Lama in Middlebury, Vermont. And at that time, now there were about 100 people at Wisdom's Goldenrod. They were doing meditation every day. These were professors of symbolic logic at Cornell and astrophysicists who ran the astrophysics department at Colgate University. So it was a big group. And the group went to Middlebury to see the Dalai Lama. And at that time, so my father-in-law, whose name is Anthony Damiani, so Anthony had had lung surgery and had an aneurysm. He was in bad health. So this is like September 30th of 1984, and we're in Middlebury, Vermont, and the Dalai Lama is getting ready to leave on the train on the 30th. And Anthony says to the Dalai Lama, "Would you take over the spiritual leadership of Wisdom's Goldenrod?" Now, Wisdom's Goldenrod were adults. They were my age, so we were younger, of course. We were, that was a long time ago. So the Dalai Lama, not knowing what to say, because they had communicated. We had made trips to Toronto to see him. He had come to Wisdom's Goldenrod in upstate New York. So he later said, the Dalai Lama, he said, "I gave a dying man his wish." Because Anthony said, "Would you take over spiritual guardianship of this group, Wisdom's Goldenrod?" And so the Dalai Lama said yes, and so the Dalai Lama left on the train, and we all drove home, my husband, me, and we had 2 little boys under the age of 4. And we drove home, and we got home, and then the day that Anthony got home, in the middle of the night, he died. The clock stopped from the aneurysm. The clock stopped at 4 a.m. And from that time, my husband Paul, who was a really strong guy, he built our house from scratch. He could sail we had a dragon sailboat, and he could get out there in a storm when it broke away from the dock, and he could dive into the boat and get the sail, and he pulled cars out of ditches and stuff. He was a really, really strong guy psychologically, and he also had mastered, a Kant's critique of pure reason, which, being a philosopher and having taught philosophy, I can't say I would do that unless I had to teach a course on it, and he did this before the age of 18. He knew Buddhist logic. He owned 12 cartons, not 12 books, 12 cartons of Buddhist logic. So as much as the Buddhists say that they don't have a lot to say and they disregard the intellect because it's all dependent origination, we had 12 cartons of books on Buddhist logic that were translated into English that my husband actually read. So this was one powerful guy. But after Anthony died on October 2nd of 1984, Paul went into a state of meditation, and he said, "You better you better take the boys and go down with your mother to Newport News. My mom, I grew up in Newport News, and because he said, I don't know what's going to happen, but he was used to meditating. This was a spiritual group. Meditation went on several hours. People could come in the morning and meditate. There was daily meditation every day. There were classes, seminars till 2 in the morning, classes on astrology, metaphysical astrology based on T. Subaru. There was Buddhist logic, Vedanta, mostly Neoplatonism, Plotinus. These were very rigorous courses because the brains and the intellects that were there were really, off the charts. So this was a big, powerful group. So anyway, so we would go to class. I was there for 13 years doing this heavy meditation study. So Paul was used to doing, before we were married, Paul was living on the property and meditating every day. So his father once told me, Anthony, that Paul had, through his meditation, gone to the other side. Whatever that meant, I didn't understand. But when his father died, Paul told me one day, he said, I had the chance to follow Anthony. I had the chance to follow Anthony in meditation. And I didn't know what he meant. And I said, what do you mean? And I said, what do you mean, die? What do you mean you have to die? What are you talking about? And he said, I don't know what that means. But from that moment on, he told me that the glue was gone. The glue was gone, meaning the death of his father. And I watched as my husband unraveled. And he began to have a vision, have what I would call an inner sight. And he began to notice energies that were invisible to me and to ordinary sight, but they were visible to him in this altered state of consciousness that he was in because of the death of his father. So he described to me an energy that was left behind after the death of his father, and he said it was hanging around. Now you got to picture this place. This is an amazing place. This is on Seneca Lake in upstate New York, one of the most beautiful regions in upstate New York. New York is not just New York City. It's beautiful, and the Finger Lakes was absolutely beautiful. So there's 40 acres. Anthony, my father-in-law, who was respected and loved by the Dalai Lama, whose teacher was Paul Brunton, he was a toll booth collector. And he taught himself philosophy from the time he was a little boy and earned the respect of all these brilliant minds all over the place. So anyway, so Paul, where was it? So Paul is, so he is getting more and more shaky, more and more nervous, and he's seeing these currents. And he says to me, there's residue hanging around, and it's dangerous. The residue is dangerous. I don't know what it is. And I said, well, explain to me. What is it that you see, and why are you afraid, And there were things like, I gave the baby clothes to somebody, and he said, you got to go back and get them. That's a Christian fundamentalist. There's bad energy that's going to come back to us if they wear the baby's clothes, And I said, this is going too far. I said, you got to get in. I said, you go get it. Here's the address. Because this is crazy, because I didn't know anything about psychic stuff. I didn't know that vibrational energy could travel, through used clothing or come back to you or anything else. And so he said, I don't know what it is, but it's going to target us. So getting back to the beautiful place. Anthony Damiani and his wife lived up on the highway. My mother had a cottage on Seneca Lake. This was about maybe 3/4 of a mile distance. And Paul and I had a house in the middle of 40 acres of the most beautiful, beautiful, beautiful property overlooking Seneca Lake. It was absolutely beautiful. So Wisdom's Goldenrod, 7 acres of this property that belonged to Anthony and Ella Mae Damiani was turned into a not-for-profit center called, the mission of which is somewhere in here. Wisdom's Goldenrod, Center for Philosophic Studies, whose mission is somewhere in there. I can't find it. Anyway, so its mission was to bring all traditions together, whether it was Buddhist, American, Christian, Jewish, whatever, and to bring these different diverse traditions together in dialogue. And so Anthony always had a bookstore all those years, and one of the names of the bookstores that it was changed to was New Alexandrian. So this was the spirit of Alexandria. You take the Egyptians, you take the Persians, the Palestinians, you take whatever was going on in Palestine, Persia, Egypt, and India. And this was a great school of Neoplatonism that was in the 3rd century, 3rd, 4th century, the first 3 centuries of the Alexandrian Neoplatonic school. And this was, in Anthony's vision, a re-expression of that in much the same way that Pythagoras had a school, and that was burned up because of local jealousy and everything. And then Socrates and Plato started the Platonic Academy based on what Pythagoras had done. And then the Platonic Academy lasted, and then the Alexandrian school continued that tradition. Okay, and so Wisdom's goldenrod was in Anthony's vision to a rebirth, a resurrection of that notion that different philosophies, mystical traditions could come together and not be exclusive, like you find in most, in most esoteric, what we call dogmatic religions. So this was the context in which these deaths occurred. So Paul, as the year went on, Paul got more and more stressed out, more and more anxious, and he he went to India with a friend of ours, Om Gupta, who wrote the True Lunar Nodes that changed astrology, that corrected the North and South Node for those of you who are into astrology. So he went off with Om to the Shankaracharyas who live in the south of India. These are the spiritual heads of India, and there's always one in every generation. So you have the elder Shankaracharya, then you have one in the middle age, and one, and then you have one who's a teenager and one who's a child. So if anyone dies, they're trained to go up there. And Wisdom's goldenrod had a very strong and powerful spiritual connection, that was arising from this vision and this place, Wisdom's goldenrod, with its library and its study center and its outbuildings for people to stay there. It had a connection with the Dalai Lama, who, of course, now is in Dharamsala, not Tibet, but with Tibetan Buddhism, and with the Shankaracharyas in India. And there were many students, and because Anthony's work started in 1968 in a little bookstore in Ithaca, New York. And so students would go, to the Shankaracharya, and they would go to Dharamsala. And this spiritual grid of protection against the dark forces that apparently, according to Paul Brunton, he made the statement that the thought form of the world was being fought over. And everybody, it didn't just happen in Nazi Germany, it happens continuously. And there is this battle going on, and that we do have to know the difference between right and wrong. We have to know what is it to be dark. Just, you can't go by what you're, if you're in an evangelical church and they say all liberals and tree huggers are evil and we've got to kill them, you've got to find out for yourself what's good and what's bad, what's true and what's not. So off goes Paul to India to meet with the elder Shankaracharya, not to meet with him, but to meditate with him. The reason he went to India was to dissolve, to somehow remove this residue that he perceived as dangerous. He comes back, he cuts his trip short, he's devastated by what he sees. He was so sensitized, I think so sensitized from meditation, and he saw this great suffering going on in the poverty. And he came back absolutely devastated, with no help at all. And so then he wrote a letter to the Dalai Lama, who knew me and who knew Paul. We knew the Dalai Lama's brother, picked him up when he came to Wisdom's goldenrod, and the Dalai Lama knew my mother-in-law, my father-in-law very well, and so Paul, he knew the family. So Paul writes a letter to the Dalai Lama, and he said in the letter, "It's too late for me and Kathleen. It's too late for us. Will you raise our boys?" My boys were 3 years old and 4 years old at the time. He said, "It's too late. Can you raise our boys?" Meaning, in the Tibetan tradition, we'll take them to Dharamsala, And I'm reading this letter, and I'm like, I just, because I trusted my husband implicitly, because I trusted his intuition, because to me he was like, his intellect, his spiritual intuition, and what he had achieved in meditation was so far beyond what I could comprehend, that I'm just watching this. Neither one of us dreamed that he would take the hit. Neither one of us in a million years. He thought that this negative residue was going to hit maybe Wisdom's goldenrod or the buildings or something. He didn't know what form it was going to take. So on September 19th was the day of the fire that killed my husband. So why don't I just read a little recap of this? I'm not going to do it. It'll take too much time. So basically what happened is he was working on our riding lawnmower. I woke up that morning and I heard this loud roar, and he loved to do outdoor work. He had built our house from scratch. He did everything except he needed help with the windows, and I did the oak flooring, scraping. And so he loved being outdoors. He had a job at a local factory, worked his way up from the factory to management. So what happened was, meantime, during all of this spiritual stuff going on, I was setting up very large concerts and festivals in upstate New York, very successful, still going on, trace of them today, in 4 or 5 different venues. Raised the money, built the stage. This was the New York City Opera, the Syracuse Symphony, Rochester Philharmonic. So I had this amazing, life-affirming, Dionysian job with the state of New York and outdoor festivals, and it was really great. So when my job was eliminated, I stayed on as a private contractor. So I took the kids to get my paycheck that day, and the day of the fire, he had me call him out sick, and that was very unusual for him. He never took a sick day. He said, my emotional state is too intense for the boys. Take the boys. So I got my mother, who was in a cottage down the road, and we all went off to Ithaca. And then I get the call from my sister-in-law that that there had been a fire, that he was still alive. So he survived 9 days in the hospital at the burn unit in Elmira at St. Joseph's Hospital. And the support that came in from students that were in Dharamsala, that were in, with the Dalai Lama, and from the Shankaracharyas, all these prayers poured in, and there was a lot of support. I was able to stay with him 7 days. On the 7th day, a boiler blew up in Elmira, and all these men came in, all burned, horrible injuries. And so the nurse said that I had to leave the room because I had been in there every day with Paul. And so I left to get clothes and get a shower, an hour drive away. When I came back, he was in a coma, and he never came out of that coma. But I knew to talk to him, while he was in that coma. Now here's the point. So what happened was he died. So he lived September 19th to September 28th. Okay, so that's 9 days. So on that morning, I knew he was going to die, and I had all this. I totally lost it. I didn't know what to do, but I knew he was going to die that day. So his heart stopped as the clock struck 4 in the hospital room. And the clock had stopped permanently at Wisdom's Goldenrod 360 days earlier. Those of you who do astrology know that 360 degrees is a very important number. And thus began all these synchronicities with the books falling off the shelf. And the next day, of course, I'm in a stupor. My mother is with the boys, and I'm down at her cottage. I see a boat on Seneca Lake speeding through like a speedboat, and there's a wake behind the boat. And all of a sudden, I get the message. Anthony, his father, was the speeding boat. It was lifted out at his death. The wake, remains in this vibrational plane. And the wake is dangerous, and the wake is what killed Paul. So that was the first message that I got. And those messages, including lots of dreams, too long to go into here, there were dreams of Paul being a scapegoat for Wisdom's Goldenrod for the group. That someone else had this dream, came to me and said that Paul was led to the room like this. It was a big room like this, that he was led in the dream in the white robes of a martyr, and Paul made the announcement, "You can do what you want. I will be your scapegoat." I also had a dream that he had driven a farm machine into an intersection to save all these people's lives, and he jumped out, but we were all responsible for the destruction of the farm tractor. That was the dream that I had the morning of the fire. There were all kinds of messages. One of the books that fell off the shelf said that the 19th of September was so sacred in ancient Greece that it was given a special name, Agirmos. That means day of gathering. And Saturn is a reaping machine. In the fall, we reap. You sow, you reap and you sow. And the equinox, the fall, is very, very significant because that's the portal to the other side. That is a belief held by many religions and traditions. Supposedly the cornerstone of the pyramid was laid during that time period. The day of the 19th of September, these fires could be seen all over the islands of Greece. It was the only day in Greece that suicide was permitted. And I have to find this out. I find this out, and I'm like, well, did he commit suicide? I mean, like, what's going on? What's going on here? The other thing is that when I was a child, the only recurring nightmare I ever had was I was underground on a lawn, and there was a power mower, and I was 5 and 6 and 7 years old, recurring nightmare. I'm underneath the grass, right, and a power mower is coming at me, louder and louder with this roar, and it's a horrifying nightmare, and I wake up. So I had that nightmare of a lawnmower. It was a power mower, not a riding lawnmower, and then my husband gets blown up, by a riding lawnmower that explodes under mysterious circumstances. The sheriff, they did an investigation and they didn't know. So suddenly, for the next 13 years, I'm thrown into a world that is both symbolic, and yet I'm feeding my boys and I'm taking care of business. But for 13 years, these dreams and these messages, endless dreams and messages and research that I was able to actually unfold and write about, at ODU. That's where I got my master's and had this wonderful, wonderful program, and a dream that preceded my introduction to Dean Doug Green at ODU, where I was going to be taking 2 classes, and both were held at 4 o'clock. And one of them was to go way up in the top of a building and learn to play this grand piano. I played the piano for 12 or 13 years, but it was on fire. All these significant dreams. What can I say? I don't know. But the point of this is, to get back to the brochure, because I may be running out of time here, is Let me read this first sentence, because this is it. Because okay, so I did this talk at VVIans last week, right? And I learned something between last Saturday and in 1 week. Okay, because this is the first time it was last week, the very first time that I ever gave the talk publicly about the death of my husband. So last week, when I gave the talk, is it possible to follow a beloved partner into the underworld? I described my husband Paul's death at the age of 32 on the riding lawnmower, et cetera, et cetera. So in answer to that question, is it possible to follow a beloved partner into the underworld? I would say yes, that Paul died with the question, what happened? And we were in a state of real, friendship, spiritual friendship, as well as husband and wife. And I began to take seriously these messages and the dreams that I had. And so what I realized was this week was that I was mad when Paul died because he didn't come to me. Because with all our spiritual work and meditation, what's the use if your loved one dies and they don't come see you in a dream, And I was mad. And so I had a sweat lodge, I had a sweat lodge, and after that I would meet him in not a dream state, but actually in the night. I would wake up from the dream and I would meet him. But that's a different story. So what I realized this week, which was so cool and so profound, was that I was led into the anima mundi, because all my research on Sophia developed thought independently of Paul's death. I knew that it came out of the death, but it came, I had these all kinds of, again, visions and messages during these 13 years. But what I didn't realize was that he was leading me into the soul of the world, that's where people go when they die. This is extraordinary news. This everybody should be really happy about, because the soul of the world was removed from us through a series of events. I'd like to blame the Catholic Church because I was raised Catholic, but it's not just that Constantine made Christianity the state religion, but there were a variety of factors. Wisdom was talked about on the street. I've written extensively about that. Wisdom spoke to men in the 5 books of the Bible to act with integrity in business, and that rulers should rule wisely. The meaning of wisdom is clear perception. Clear perception about what? Life with a capital L. And guess what's gone from our universities? Guess what's gone from our religion? Who talks to you about life? What happened was the notion of soul was co-opted by Christianity, by certain forces within Christianity, not the Christianity you guys do, of course, but anyway, was co-opted so that even to this day, when all my friends want to go back to school and go into psychology, I say to them, are you aware that they don't do Carl Jung? Are you aware that they don't speak about soul? Are you aware that when you publish in the field of psychology or philosophy or any academic subject, that you can't get your dissertation approved? To this day, they're doing experimental psychology with white rats in the psychology departments, and this is because the Catholic Church owned the soul. And you can read about there's numerous books written about this. The Catholic Church owns the soul. So if you want to do science, you have to not have soul in your science. So here we have these brilliant physicists, I know one of them, Claude Swanson, who are trying to bring religion and science together. Ain't going to work. It ain't going to work. Because soul was blanketed from us. Soul was burked. It was, the anima mundi was burked. And it disappeared from the language. When you take a story away, like if a little boy and a little boy, he says, "Where's mommy?" And, I remember mommy. She made me cookies and I loved her very much. And daddy says, you could reverse the genders, not to make the guy bad. But anyway, and the father says, oh, well, there was no mother. That was your imagination. There was no mother. So if there's no story, no memory, no language, it disappears. It disappears from the collective psyche. And so what we want to do is, what I want to do, we have to bring this back. Because the dead don't go anywhere. They don't go off to a heaven. They don't go off to any perverted theologian's notion of torture. Torture comes from the mind of sick perverts, all right? And so it's this world has always, and if you read the Iranian Sufis, this world has always, up until 1700 years ago, the world was understood as also being symbolic, at least amongst the mystics. And the philosophers and the mystics brought this knowledge with traveling scholars to China, to Greece, to India, to Egypt, to Palestine, to Persia, all over the Occident and the Orient and the Palestine, the ancient Near East. And it was called by philosophers the axial age. And during this time, conscience mattered. Consciousness and conscience are etymologically the same root. If it's not evident in the politics, then there is something wrong. So during these thousands of years, before Christianity was made into the state religion, before the Christians murdered Hypatia and burned the Library of Alexandria several times, wisdom was talked about in the streets, it was venerated, and it was loved. And we have to bring this back. And you can't do that without the notion of the anima mundi. No one worships, there's no such thing as the divine Sophia. You don't worship another singularity like a god. There's no worship of Sophia. You keep Sophia. Sophia is a realm, a habitat. The one thing you need to know is what happened in Christianity. What happened, and I don't know if it was deliberate, intentional, or what, but what you have is a malignant concept. You have a malignancy in the story. You have a notion of a God that creates out of itself the rest of creation. And that male God, as it was taught to me in Catholicism, maybe not to you, is related to nothing but itself. It is not in relationship to any habitat. Why do you think we have a problem with the environment? It's because the dirty work has been done, has been laid by a misconception of the notion of the one. It's a misconception of the notion of the one. Of course, there can only be one source, okay? But that source is a multiple of goods. The good, the true, the beautiful, the justice, compassion, peace, freedom, okay? It's a multiple that is not disconnected to each other. It's a non-dual. There you go.